All right, on today's video log, hike log, we're going to go up to the 730 mine. The 730 mine is a historic site here in Colorado. It's right off Interstate 70. In fact, many of the shots, video, and still that you're going to see in this video include Interstate 70. You can hear the traffic from it really well up this entire first incline until you get fairly well back into the forest a ways. And in fairness, the interest of full disclosure, all of the video in this video, all of the footage was taken on one day. All of the stills were taken on a series of 2 hikes. I took a bunch of stills when I went out there with just Steinbeck. When my wife and Steinbeck and I went back a few weeks later, I took a second set of stills. Also, there's going to be some clips like that are about to start now that just have the audio. And those clips were specifically requested so that people could hear what the hikes sound like, as well as seeing what they look like. Now, on this hike, which was the 11th of September 2020, I didn't know it at the time that I was recording, say, this when it was 45 degrees and sunny, that I was walking into a snowstorm. And the 730 mine hike has a pretty significant elevation gain. It's rated as moderate. I'd put it on the hard end of moderate given the elevation gain. The trail's really easy to find. It's really easy to walk. There's nothing complex about that. But here you can see, looking down at the interstate, the trailhead's not meaningfully higher in elevation than the interstate. But here, which is a quarter-ish of a third of a mile in, it is. And so this trail just goes up and up and up. And there are mine ruins, like this smelter right here. That's what that piece of metal is, a smelting unit. There are mine ruins in a couple of places, a few places along the hike, as well as some adits, one of which is not closed off at the entry, most of which are. I did not go into the mine that has the open adit. Steinbeck dragged me in about 6 feet, and I said, no, we are not going in there, and I pulled him out. There was something in that mine he really wanted to explore, but I am not an abandoned mine explorer. I'll go up and I'll visit the facilities outside of them to photograph them and enjoy the hike, but I'm not going to go into a mine. And by and large, all that you really hear on hikes like this is wind. There's some traffic noise in places like this, but mostly the sound that accompanies me when I hike is wind and also me sniffling, quite frankly, because the air is cold and dry, and that's what happens. I enjoy hikes like this because there's a lot of very interesting things to photograph. Forests in and of themselves are really hard for me to photograph. I'm not good at it. I don't speak the language of forest photography. But when you walk through a forest, I love walking in forests. I find it very relaxing and peaceful. I love the sound or the near silence, maybe a few birds chirping in a forest. And then on hikes like this, the forest opens up. You have an open space with mountains in the background and some mining ruins here. And also along this hike in particular, there are places where if you have a cell phone, and I didn't do this because of my data, there are QR codes that you can scan with your phone and listen to recordings, I think it is, or maybe just read web pages about the history of some of the mines. And here you can see Steinbeck is in a red harness on some of these photos. Those were photos taken on the second time that we went out onto this trail. He was wearing his brown backpack for the first trip out to this trail. So these mine ruins were really enjoyable to photograph. If you go out to photograph these, please be very respectful of them. Don't carve your initials in them. Don't take the old nails or the wood planks or anything like that with you. Leave them as you found them. Don't take anything and don't damage anything. Also, please don't enter the mine ruins because you can damage them just putting your foot through a plank, and that damages the mine ruins. It can also really injure you, so please don't do that. This mountainside had a series of different mines, and there was a big controversy about mining rights underground with some of the mines. But going through this hillside, up this whole trail, there are different types of mining ruins, be they those cables led to that thing there, which is a hoist system. There are some outbuildings. Of course, there are some adits. Adits aren't really interesting to look at, so I took a photo of the one for the 730 mine, but I didn't take a photo of any of the others. Most of the adits on this trail are covered with heavy steel grates. There is one adit that has a very heavy steel grate over it that's got a huge dent in it, and I really kind of wished I'd had a physics major there on the hike with me to tell me how heavy the rock would have had to have been to make a dent like that. But even when there's not an old mine, well, there are mine ruins here at this part of the hike. You can see what was either part of a pulley system or an ore chute system. I honestly couldn't tell you which just looking at it. There are old pieces of wood sticking out of the ground and things like that that can tell you a lot about the type, well, maybe not you, definitely not me, somebody who knows about this stuff, the type of mining that was going on there and the buildings that once stood in those locations. And if not in this footage, then pretty soon you're going to be able to see snow showing up, because this is about there as it is. There you can see the snow. This is when we started walking into the snowstorm that wasn't forecast and was in the middle of September. One of the things here that we're going to visit on our way up to the 730 mine is a monument, and it's got its own destination. It's not easy to get to. In fact, the second time we did this hike, I said to my wife, there is no way I'm going back out to that monument again, because it follows this little spur off of the main route, and it's fine up until this point right here. And now, okay, where do we go? Do we go up and over? Honestly, that solution didn't look good, wasn't very safe. Or do we go around between that tree that's right now on the left, now out of frame, and that big boulder that we saw? I elected to go that way, which we're going to see in just a second. And it was, with Steinbeck pulling, not a whole lot of fun, either going out to the monument or coming back through. I did not enjoy this part of the hike at all. So, if you don't have a dog and a bunch of camera gear, it's probably a whole lot easier. And I wish I'd had the forethought to get some footage of what I was walking across here, because the issue is that it's very narrow and very steep. And with a really good, probably not survivable drop on the right side. So, we did get out to the monument, which is interesting, and I do not recall what the monument says, and the photos that I took of the monument didn't really turn out. The writing on it's pretty well weathered. Also, the recording that I made right now, I was reading off the monument what I could make out of the text that wasn't too weathered, was completely drowned out by the very, very strong wind up at this part of the hike. So, the wind here was brutal, and it was cold, and this was one of the hardest parts of the hike because it was also the most exposed to the elements, as you can see here as I pan around. But it was enjoyable to get out there and see the views from that spot. I just would not want to have to do that part of the hike again. So the 730 mine hike itself is like I was saying earlier, rated, I think, hard, or maybe a hard moderate. And that's solely because of the elevation gain. And the first mile has a heck of a lot of elevation gain. I want to say it's around 2,000 feet. So it's basically just shooting up a hill and a bunch of switchbacks. And going up that hill, I was impressed by how fit the miners must have been to walk up that hill every day before it was made wide enough for mules. And thinking about how they must have built some of the first structures here, like the hoist system must have been, or some hoist system must have been fairly early to get building materials up the side of the mountain. Just really incredibly dedicated and hardworking people must have been involved in getting these mines built and keeping them running. And you can see here, like, the amount of work that went into it. This is the footing of an old building. And you can kind of see some of the parts up at the top of the frame of what was probably the wall, one of the walls. It was also a fairly large building, given the size of the footings there, the foundation, and the size of the debris field that surrounded it. I couldn't tell you when it fell down, but it couldn't have been more than, within the last couple of decades. So judging by how intact the debris field is and then how intact the walls and roof structure are where they collapsed on themselves. In this canyon here, you could start hearing distant water. The microphone on the camera didn't pick it up. Otherwise, I would have definitely played it for you. But you could hear the sound of water just all of a sudden. And hiking in canyons where there's water, it's one of the most amazing things is you hear wind or trees or nothing, and then boom, instantly water. You just get to a point where the side of the mountain or the side of the canyon no longer blocks the sound of the water from reaching your ears, and there's a hard line that you cross when you're out hiking these things where suddenly you hear the water. So, and that was at this point. And you can see the water down there. We're going to get up a little bit further, and there are a couple more smelters that have fallen into the creek, river. Here we go. And this is actually the last clip that I recorded in video. This is where I turned off the camera because the gimbal batteries had died and I didn't have spare with me. But this is also the most interesting and photogenic part of the hike. It's around 2.3 miles in, I think. It's a 4.5 mile round trip hike. After I took these photos here, I went up and around the trail a little bit and actually did get out to the 730 mine at it. And we'll look at the photos of those last. But for me, the culmination of this hike was this spot with those two smelters because they had the most interesting photographic potential. And here are some other photos that I took along the way that I didn't really have a place to work into the overall narrative, but you might recognize some of the scenes from some of the clips of the video here. Steinbeck investigating some rocks. An old wagon that had been abandoned has fallen apart. That's probably part of an ore chute or a cart loading facility. That's more of the cable structure right there, just up in the woods, hidden by the trees. That's at the very beginning at the trailhead. I don't know what it was for. It's just an old dead tree that I thought looked neat, especially with the clouds coming in very quickly behind it. That's upstream of the smelters. Here's the 730 mine indicator. And this is what you can see inside the 730 mine. On the right side here, you can see the edge of there's a gate, not a gate, like a grate blocking the entrance to the mine. And so you can see one of those bars there. The bars are close enough that I couldn't get the camera situated so that I could shoot through the bars. And then that's as far back into the mine as you can see. And that's the 730 mine. It's pretty interesting looking at it. I'm sure it would be a very exciting place to explore as a mine explorer, but that's for somebody else to do. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next hike log.